Do we wait for sharing yet?
Yes.
Yeah, not to share yet.
Well, you do it.
When the time comes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Publishing Open Access Journals at a Scholarly Society or University. My name is Danielle Padula, and I'm the host for today's webinar. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. Again, as I said, my name is Danielle. I head up community development at Scholastica, and I'll be your host today. We have some great presentations lined up for you. Scholastica users will be sharing their experience publishing open access journals at scholarly societies and universities, including advice on how to launch new journals and expand existing journal programs with limited resources. So before we get started, I wanted to share a bit of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is expected to run for about 1 hour. Following the presentations, we will have a 10 to 15-minute audio Q&A. Please submit any questions that you have for the speakers via the Q&A chat panel on your screen. And you're welcome to submit questions at any point during the presentations. We will address all of them at the end of the webinar. So now I want to take a few moments to introduce our guest speakers, whom we so appreciate joining us today. With us, we have Peter Coles, professor in and head of the Department of Astrophysics. The Department of Theoretical Physics at Maynooth University and editor-in-chief of the Open Journal of Astrophysics, which is published by Maynooth Academic Publishing. Fiona Morley, head of digital programs and information systems at Maynooth University Library. She's currently working to develop Maynooth's publishing program. Peter and Fiona will present first on the launch of the Open Journal of Astrophysics and how Maynooth University Library is supporting open access journal publishing and working to develop their publishing program. We also have Ashley Amaya with us today. Ashley is Senior Research Survey Methodologist at RTI International and Editor-in-Chief of Survey Practice, the official e-journal of the American Association for Public Opinion Research. And we'll hear from Ashley about her experience as Editor-in-Chief of Survey Practice and how she's worked to modernize the journal's publishing operations and meet publishing best practices. And finally, who is Scholastica? For those unfamiliar with us, Scholastica is a web-based journal management platform with tools and services for peer review, publishing, hosting, and typesetting. Our mission is to make journal publishing more efficient and affordable to facilitate a sustainable research future. And the presentations we'll see today are really great examples of sustainable, digitally driven journal models. So let's get started with some quick background. First, what do we mean by publishing at a university or society? Today we're going to be talking about publishing in-house with the help of tools and services, and I wanted to make this distinction mainly for scholarly societies because many societies do partner with external publishers. What we'll look at today are examples of how societies and universities can run their own journal programs. In the traditional publisher model, for the most part, all aspects of publishing are centralized and specialized under the publisher. So the publisher has a typesetting team, an IT team, and so forth. In the print model, they would have a printer. And in this visual, we have the society bubble off to the side because often societies will be partnered with a publisher that's doing all of this. Some universities are able to do this and really become more specialized publishers with things like internal typesetting staff or their own web development team. But often what we see is a sort of flipping of the traditional publisher model where the university or society doesn't have to be quite as specialized in and orchestrating all these steps. So it's a leaner model using tools and services, which is what we'll be looking at today. And in this sort of flip model, society and university-run journal programs are able to take a more modular approach to publishing using online tools and services for each part of the process. So for example, they can run their own publishing operations without needing a copy editing staff or a dedicated web development team. This can make publishing services more manageable because less time is needed. It can be easier for a small staff. There's often lower costs and opportunity to modernize each aspect of operations. With in-house publishing of any kind, of course, universities and societies remain in control of publishing decisions, and they can choose the most efficient tools and methods for each part of the process. And I think it's worth noting that society and university journal publishing programs are part of a more diversified publishing landscape and ultimately a more equitable one. What we are seeing now with these different types of publishing programs emerging is more diversified control of journals, the potential for good competition and hopefully pricing pressure in the market, and often more room for experimentation. And we'll hear about some different journal models today. So what we're going to cover is some case studies and advice on launching and developing journals and expanding journal programs from Scholastica users. And some themes that I wanted to highlight are digital publishing, the fact that these are very digitally driven journal models. And I think that's helped them to operate as they do. So I think that's an important thing to note. And also academy control. In these journal models, the society and university are in control of the journal and decisions pertaining to things like copyright and costs. So this is an academy driven model. So now I'm going to hand it over to Peter and Fiona to talk about the Open Journal of Astrophysics and Maynooth University's Library of Publishing initiatives. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Let me share yours now.
Okay.
So it's gone the same way as the other one, but you can just...
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fiona Worley, Head of Digital Programs and Information Systems here at Maynooth University Library. Sorry, we're having a little trouble with slide sharing here, but hopefully you can see something. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the background context from the library perspective as to why we've become involved in piloting open publishing initiatives. Open science, open access, open publishing are key areas in the university and research sector, particularly as the traditional scholarly publishing model is being globally challenged. And
you know what, Fiona, I think to share your slides, if you want to share in presenter mode, if you just click on slideshow, and then if you click on...
from beginning, yes, we've tried that.
Oh, if you click on play from start, is that showing for you on the left? You have play from...
It's not actually...
it's not actually...
You're not actually seeing anything.
Okay.
So let's just stop for a minute and...
If you'd like, I can share your slides for you.
Yeah, maybe that's easier then. It might be more efficient.
Try one more time. Share. Beginning.
Or from current slide, maybe?
Yeah, it's not. I'm afraid it's stuck. So if you have Fiona's slides, could you share them from your...
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to...
Thanks so much. You can move on to slide 2 now anyway, so...
Okay.
We'll stop this one. There we go.
Okay.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, so as to why libraries support open publishing, as I mentioned there, the traditional scholarly publishing model is being globally challenged now. So we are looking at alternatives to how we can publish and encourage publishing. So from our point of view, open publishing is an opportunity to address local needs and promote research on our campus. And we encourage open access publishing models and permissive licensing because these allow a greater volume of high quality open access scholarship in this developing area. It also gives, we feel, authors greater control over how their work is published and disseminated, and it facilitates publication of niche or very specialised topics, conference proceedings, grey literature, or alternative formats that might not fit the traditional publishing models. And I think that's quite important. Cost considerations are always, of course, important. We live now in an era of rising subscription prices and constrained budgets, so obviously a lower cost publishing model of some kind, or no cost even better, is definitely something we want to explore. We know ourselves, amongst our own library staff, we have a lot of expertise in multiple areas, and this expertise we feel is very transferable to local publishing support. So on the next slide, actually, I'll just talk a little bit about Maynooth University and open access, because this sort of influences our decisions really around supporting open access publishing and open access activities. We were the first university in Ireland to establish an open access repository way back in 2003. It's called Mural. It's managed by the library. And we also have an open access mandate, which was introduced in 2008 and revised subsequently. And this is based on national principles for open access. And just by way of context, we do believe that providing free online access to the university's research and scholarly output will maximise the visibility and dissemination of our research. Now, our open access policy requires that all research and scholarly publication which arise in whole or in part from research carried out at the university and subject to the copyright and archiving policies of the publisher be made available at the earliest possible date through the university's open access repository mural. And I suppose open access publishing conducted at a local level is a bit of an extension of this, and it's another route for scholars to make their work available. Now, we recognise that researcher freedom is important, and researchers are free to publish first wherever they feel is more appropriate, regardless of the publisher's policy in open access. But use of those who support open access is encouraged, and by extension, this includes local open access journal platforms. So I'll just move on to talk a small bit about the pilot project we have with the Open Journal of Astrophysics and Scholastica. Background to this, the library had already investigated digital object identifiers in the assignation of minute academic publishing namespace with a view to expanding our role in facilitating open publishing. So we had been considering this for some time. And then we had the fortunate coincidence of liaising with Professor Coles regarding his existing publication, the Open Journal of Astrophysics, which he had already been publishing for some time, but needed a different platform on which to host. Resource limitations were a factor for both ourselves and the library, and also for Peter's department as well. We, limited financial resources, limited staff resources, it obviously was kind of a factor in deciding what way could we go to continue this publication or to expand into other publications. One thing that was important for both of us is that we could find an easy-to-use, flexible publishing platform with structures that would permit robust peer review and also additional services if required, for example, typesetting. Because one thing that we feel is important is that any open publishing we do should be of high quality, should have the standard, robust peer review processes that would exist in traditional publishing, so that it's not just a sort of a nice to have additional feature. It's actually a route of publishing that adheres to the same standards as all other academic publishing would. So following this, we had discussions with yourselves at Scholastica, and we subsequently developed the journal space with the Maynooth University branding, and it was actually launched on Research Week in October 2018 by the university president, which is indicative in itself of the importance that the university gave to it. In terms of other open publishing initiatives from the library point of view, obviously we want to work with Professor Coles on expansion of the Journal of Astrophysics in terms of promoting it, and obviously it's growing and more and more articles are being submitted, which is fantastic to see. And our next step will be obviously adding it to the directory of open access journals. Now there's a fine body of articles there ready to make it applicable for that entry. We'd hope now to expand this and discuss with other academics across campus on possibilities for other publications, whether they be on the Scholastica platform or elsewhere, depending on the specific needs and requirements or the subject matter. We have a pilot project pending now for historical papers on military studies using the Open Journal system, which is a different platform and an open service, and that's another consideration as well. Obviously, Scholastica has many attractive features because of the fact that it's quite managed, which is useful for us. We have an Open Publishing Information Day coming soon, October 22nd, which is Research Week here in this university, which will be open to staff and students. And we have multiple speakers from the university press and academics who are publishing or planning to publish journals, reviewers of journals and librarians, just to basically bring a community of people with interest in open publishing together to share their experiences and best practices. So this is a first for us to do it in this structured way, so we're quite excited about that. And in terms of what we'll do going into the future, obviously the collaboration I've mentioned will be important for us to kind of try and push to get more and more open access publishing going locally. We'd like to expand, more open access publishing initiatives, whether it be on Scholastica or other platforms, and build knowledge and expertise on campus around publishing. And maybe in due course, we might look at Maynooth academic publishing becoming a university press in the future. we need to build up a lot of expertise around this yet, but, you know, we like to dream big at least. So, you know, watch this space. So from my point of view, really, that's all I wanted to say, because I want to give Peter a chance to showcase the journal itself. But I'm happy to take any questions at some stage, and be happy to answer them.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I'm going to now go ahead and switch over to Peter's slides.
Fine.
Okay, so let's see. Here we go. Okay.
That seems to work. So what I want to do in this brief presentation is just to give you a little bit of the background to the Open Journal of Astrophysics project. There's a little bit of history and also kind of the motivation for why we wanted to do it and why we ended up on Scholastica. So if I can have the next slide. The idea of the Open Journal of Astrophysics isn't new. I actually had it about 6 years ago, or maybe more. And a bunch of other colleagues of mine in astrophysics had similar ideas. So what we did was we got together kind of in our spare time and developed a standalone platform to do what we wanted to do. It was quite a big task, and none of us are kind of professional web developers or anything. So we got a reasonable platform together and actually opened a journal, but published only 3 papers. But it was never really better than the beta version. It had some stability issues. We did register the domain of theoj.org, and astro.theoj.org is actually the Open Journal, even though it's now run by Scholastica because we transferred the site. Now, the 4 of us who set it up actually diversified and went on different projects. I moved location to Maynooth. Another member of the group who set it up set up a thing called the Journal of Open Source Software, which is still going on, a different kind of publication method. When I came to Maynooth a couple of years ago, I was anxious not to let the idea disappear. So after some discussion, we decided to relaunch with a professional platform rather than the slightly ad hoc platform that we developed ourselves. So if you can move to the next slide. The background to this is that in astrophysics, astrophysics is an example of a field of blue skies research, and it's largely funded by the taxpayer. So I've always felt that any potential taxpayer should have access to the publications of that research. And that was I felt that for many years, and that was one of the reasons for going for an open access publication. There are general questions about open access in the context of the public engagement with science, and one is to build trust. I mean, if all the publications are hidden behind paywalls and difficult to access by any independent person, then I think it kind of encourages conspiracy theorists and so on, and we've actually seen that in a number of examples. I also think that open science is better science. Open access is only part of what open science means. I think we should actually do as much science as possible out in the open, and which means giving people the chance to reproduce scientific results, not just publishing the results, but also publishing the data, publishing the pipelines, the tools, the analysis software, and everything. So we're just going to talk about open access publishing here, but it's part of a general philosophy to science, which is that it should all be done in the open. And moving on, for the specific issue of astrophysics, since the early 1990s, almost all new astrophysics research has been available on open access channel called the archive, and I'll come back to the archive later. And to be honest, it's been a very long time since I've actually looked up a paper in a journal. I get all of my papers from the archive, all the new ones from the archive. The archive is run on a shoestring, so let me please give a plug that if anyone's interested in the archive, please make a donation to running it. But it's a fraction, basically any department that has physics or astrophysics can actually get papers from it for free, and the running costs of it are relatively small. And on the other side, despite the fact that publishing things on the internet is getting cheaper and cheaper, subscriptions to traditional academic journals have increased steadily when they should be going down, really. So the background to the Open Journal is that we've got the archive, which has been around for 25 years. Why are we paying so much for journals? Basically, it's all going in profit to private companies, and learned science societies also take profits from their publishing wings, and they will argue that they're doing good things with the revenue that they get, which in many cases they are, but I don't think it's equitable for that money to be taken from library budgets to do it. It's not a transparent way of funding their activities. So my question is basically, why do we have these journals when we've got the archive? And that's what the inspiration was behind the Open Journal project. So moving on, that's the picture I took this morning. It doesn't matter if you can't read it. That's the archive. It looks fairly basic, but it can, all you can see on that is the physics page, and you'll see right at the top, astrophysics. And astrophysics is one of the oldest areas to be on the archive, and we've been using it for a long time. The archive submissions are basically electronic versions of papers. People who use it will do one of two things. They'll either wait until the paper is refereed and accepted by a journal and then submit something to the archive, or, and the majority of people in my field do this, they submit an e-print to the archive, and that means that people will see it before it's accepted for publication and actually get a lot more feedback. So people will email in and say, and with comments on it, so you get kind of more people looking at it than referees would while it was being refereed. So that's just what the archive is. There's also condensed matter and other things as well. The one thing the archive doesn't do is peer review. And almost everyone accepts that peer review is really the thing that adds value to a journal. We could discuss the extent to which it actually does that, because peer review is not perfect, but it is perceived to be a value, a sort of quality mark on a paper, whether it's been peer reviewed. So the only thing we need to do to cut out the journals, essentially, is to add peer review to the archive. So the archive is not peer reviewed, but journals are. Incidentally, you'll all know that peer review is not done by a journal, but by other academics, and we usually do it for nothing. And if it is peer review that adds value, that value, it does not come back to the people who actually generate it, usually. So I think more radical publication model it could make peer review much more effective, and maybe we can talk about that in the questions. I should just mention that one of our colleagues, Chris Lintott, who helped us launch the project, is also very active in a range of citizen science things like Galaxy Zoo, and that's part of the inspiration of getting more people involved in doing this kind of thing. So if we move to the next slide. So the logic, this is just summarizing, the archive and to the NASA ADS system, which keeps a sort of historical catalogue of older papers, not current ones, has basically, in astrophysics, made the traditional journals virtually redundant. And it's actually paying for a large article processing fee to achieve open access seems to be a complete rip-off as far as I'm concerned. The papers are already there for free on the archive, so there's no reason to do that. So the Open Journal project is free, it's totally open access, and it's community run, and the peer review is community based. And as Fiona said, it's now published by Maynooth Academic Publishing. I'm very happy to have joined forces to launch this project here in Maynooth last year, in fact, as Fiona said. So moving on, I'll say something about how it works on Scholastica. So basically, you can think of the Scholastica platform as doing two things. One is managing and organizing the peer review, and the other one is actually publishing the papers. And the first part is fairly traditional for an online journal. Authors submit their papers. In our case, they can submit the papers onto the archive, and the platform kind of pulls the paper from the archive. So you only just have to submit the archive ID. The paper is then assigned to editors. We have a dozen very distinguished editors from around the world, all who highly esteemed astrophysicists. They select referees. We generally use 2, and they'll do the usual process. Referees' comments are sent to the authors. The authors revise the paper, and that keeps going on until the paper is accepted, or not, as the case may be. The publishing side of the Open Journal of Astrophysics is very, very simple, because the paper itself appears on the archive, and all we do is place an overlay on top of that paper to say this paper has been peer-reviewed. The actual work is on the archive. We do issue a digital object identifier from the Open Journal, and that is registered with Crossref for the purposes of dealing with citations and other things. Actually, the NASA ADS system also does that independently, so we have 2 routes for resolving citations. So moving on. This, here in TV shows, they say, here's one I did earlier. This actually was the latest publication. It is, that's how it appears on the Open Journal of Astrophysics website. There's just an overlay. You see on the left, it has the title and some metadata, the DOI of the paper, the date of publication, and some keywords. The abstract appears on the right. And if you click on one of the buttons, this is not a live demo, so it's just a screen grab. If you click on one of the buttons, we'll go to the next slide. It takes you to the archive entry, which looks like this. And so that's basically the submission to the archive. The abstract is there again. And if you look very carefully in the bottom left, you'll see the DOI is there in the field of the archive. So that is picked up by all kinds of bots and trawlers and things that like to look for citations and whatnot. So that's the latest one. Since last year, we've actually published something like a dozen papers on this, and we have many, many more in the platform going through the peer review system. So I'll just end. It's been rather fast, but I hope I've given you the sort of idea of the motivation. In the next slide, you will see that we actually have, that's the astro.theoj.org is where the journal itself lives. We've also got a bit of social media interaction with this. So there's a Facebook page where all of our papers appear and attract some discussion and comments and so on. It's a Facebook page. We also have a Twitter account, and all of our papers are kind of advertised and promoted through those channels. And as I say, we've picked up. The start of the journal was a little bit slow, but that was good because most of the editors, we didn't know what we were doing with the platform, so we didn't want to have a great deluge of papers while we were still finding our way around. Now we're getting much more efficient, and so the speed is actually ramping up, and we probably will need to recruit some more editors soon. So that's it from me. The next slide just says any questions, but you probably maybe should take questions at the end of this webinar rather than now. So because of the time, I don't know.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we'll take questions at the end. So everybody listening, if you have a question now, feel free to type it into the Q&A chat panel, and those will all collect so that at the end we can look at those questions. That was great. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Ashley can share hers.
Thank you. Let's see. All right. So hi, I'm Ashley Amaya. I am the editor-in-chief of Survey Practice. And as Danielle already mentioned, I'm also a senior survey research methodologist at RTI International. So thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about Survey Practice. I took over as editor-in-chief in 2017, and we did a massive overhaul of the project. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And I will say that while I'll speak a lot about the benefits of open access journals, it ties in a lot with the web-only format and just the lack of print and the cost that associated with that. So a lot of what I have to say today about why we run survey practice the way we do is kind of a combination of all of those different pieces. So let me give you how the journal got started. So APOR, which is the American Association for Public Opinion Research, that's our my home professional association. They actually already had pre-existing peer-reviewed journals. They run the Public Opinion Quarterly, which is managed by Oxford University Press and is both subscription-based and print-based. And then after the start of survey practice, they launched a second journal, the Journal of Survey Statistics and Methodology, which is also run by OUP and is similarly in print and subscription based. And so one of the holes that the organization identified was that these existing journals are slow. It takes time for peer review. It then takes time to bundle everything into an issue, to go through the copy editing and typesetting process, and then to get them printed. And then in addition to that, they're also very theoretically based and a lot less applied. And so what APOR wanted to do in the creation of survey practice is to provide current information, kind of on the ground information about what is changing and what are the new methods being used to collect survey data now, to really start a dialogue. And so that meant a lot of feasibility studies, a lot of ad hoc qualitative research that would never make it into a peer-reviewed journal because it's not tried and true yet. And then they also wanted it to be very useful for survey and public opinion practitioners, in the sense that they wanted it to be used and something that could be implemented, have enough information to be implemented and replicated. And they also wanted it to be accessible to new researchers. So this would be very foundational knowledge, not some of the more kind of higher level or more detailed statistics and theory that you find in the peer-reviewed journals. So that was kind of the purpose of survey practice. And so in 2008, we finally launched it. I was not on the editorial board at that time, but John Kennedy was our first editor-in-chief. And like others have said already, they knew nothing about what they were doing. And neither did I when I took this over, in the sense that we're not publishers. And so we had launched, survey practice was launched on WordPress, which is kind of a foundational template and site to launch various websites. It is not meant to be a necessarily a publishing site for a journal, but that was what we used. It is open access itself. And so improvements to that site are a little, or that template are a little ad hoc. But we launched it there. It did not come with any type of article management system. So that was done via email, and then later via a very rudimentary article or submission manuscript management system that WordPress did support. But there was no automation to it, etc. It was very clunky to navigate, and it just wasn't meant for publishing a journal. So, but that was launched in 2008. And it is an editor-reviewed journal. As I mentioned before, we wanted to get information out there quickly. And so we wanted a foundational group of individuals that knew that they were going to be tasked every month or so with a new article to review. They are experts in the field, but it does mean that we don't go out and find the expert in that niche subject to review and have a peer-reviewed journal. The content, it was a little bit different from a traditional journal as well, in the sense that we have very short articles, 1,500 words. And that's expanded since then. It's now at 2,500 words, but they are still very short. And the idea, I live in DC, and so the idea for me is I want to be able to read an article while I'm on the train in the morning. It takes me 20 minutes. There's a lot of noise in the background, and so it should really be for individuals that do this on a do survey work on a day-to-day basis, or for grad students or young researchers that are trying to get into the field and just need some basic information. And then we also published a lot of articles that were actually written or solicited by the editors themselves. So we had and have again an Ask the Expert column, where we go out and interview an expert in the field on anything from career development to specific techniques to where they think the industry is going. It used to be, we no longer have an editor's note that kind of were thoughts about recent conferences, etc., that might have gone on in since the previous issue. And then we also had and still have an annual list that comes out of recent books and special issues in other journals on topics related to survey research. The cost of the journal then and now is on a shoestring budget. The editors don't get paid. And before, when we were operating on WordPress, the site management was free as well. So our only cost at the origination was a copy editing. We had to pay for a copy editor. So as I've kind of alluded to already, we chose open access for a variety of reasons. And as I mentioned, part of this is less about open access and more about being a web-only and editor-driven, separate from a publishing house kind of entity. But we wanted faster turnaround. We wanted things to come in, and as soon as they came in, we could get them out. So one example of that might be after the 2016 elections, we were able to do a debrief on kind of what went right and what went right and wrong with polling, and that's because we had a much faster turnaround than some of our journal counterparts. We also wanted more control over the content, so we wanted the ability to kind of have younger, more inexperienced authors and have that flexibility to go through that process with them in the review process. We also wanted the ability to publish or to recruit some material and publish things that you might not find in a traditional journal. And then we also needed it to be less expensive. And that meant doing away with print. But we also wanted it to be free for our readers. Like I mentioned, we wanted our readership may not have a lot of money. They might be students, or they might not be real keen on spending money on academic journals. We also wanted it to be free for authors. A lot of our authors are government employees, and so several open access journals, to recoup the costs of running an open access journals, often require authors to pay for submissions, and we didn't want that as well. So APOR, our founding agency or association, actually gives us a small budget to run the show on. So when I took over in 2017, there were a lot of kind of challenges with the journal. They were deciding whether or not to keep the journal up and running. And there were a lot of reasons for that. We, like I mentioned before, really didn't have article management. So we had no ability to really track, or at least track easily, rejections, revise and resubmits, acceptances, the timing it took between submission and publication, etc. That was really challenging, and it was causing delays in publication. We didn't have DOIs. Like I said, we didn't know what we were doing. So we didn't know that was something we needed to do. We had very little marketing associated with new articles came out. We had long delays in publishing, partly because of the article management system or the lack of. And so that was kind of a foundation that meant we weren't meeting our initial purpose and mission in the first place, because the whole point was to turn things out quickly. We had no device optimization, meaning that you could really only read our articles well on a PC. So if you were on a mobile or a tablet, that was very difficult. And so if you were trying to do what I was trying to do, which was read an article on the train, that wasn't real possible. We weren't archiving at all. And we also weren't capitalizing on the fact that we are web only. And that gives us the freedom to do some things that we might not be able to do if we're in print. Not only print in color, but incorporate videos, incorporate comments, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the left-hand side is what the journal looks like now. This is our front screen, and you can, it's surveypractice.org, I believe. But we've gone ahead and made a whole, we spent 2017 really focusing less on publishing, so we published very little in 2017, and more on redesigning and fixing all of our challenges. So we migrated the site to Scholastica. We did a massive kind of investigation of various companies and sites to see we needed something that could manage the articles themselves or submissions, and then also publish. It did cost more in the sense that Scholastica is not free, but we were able to figure out how to renegotiate and move costs around elsewhere in order to make that work for us. We have much more tracking and automation, which is helpful to get things out faster. So for example, before I or whoever was editor-in-chief would have to manually identify which reviews are late and go out and email those individuals. All of that's now automated. People get in reminders to review at 2 week, 1 week, and then at due date. We had built-in, now there's built-in typesetting, so that's another step where we were having to hand it off to another individual before. We don't have to do that. I will say that when we did this migration from the WordPress site to Scholastica, it was a bit of a nightmare. And that was not Scholastica's fault, but it was because we were operating on a 10-year-old version of WordPress, and nobody had been trained on how to use WordPress properly. And so articles were getting uploaded in completely haphazard manner, just good enough so that they displayed on the public site. And so a lot of the metadata did not transfer over very well, and there was a large QC process that had to be undertaken. So all of our articles now have DOIs. We had to register with Crossref. It took all of 2 seconds. And then we did a batch update to update or add DOIs to all of our past issues. And now we have a process implemented for all new articles. So aside from the editorial board and Scholastica, who manages the site itself, and our typesetting process, we also have a copy editor that's on staff, or that we pay to, and she's the person that actually gets a new DOI every time we have a new article. We now, we've started a Facebook page, we started a Twitter account, and we improved the management of our existing listserv. So now that every article comes out, a blast goes out to all 3 of those sources or sites. And then in addition to that, APOR, our professional association, also has a listserv, and we send a monthly email, we post a monthly email to that listserv that just says, hey, here's what you've missed in the past month. So we were having over a year delay between submission and publication before, sometimes even 6 months before an article got reviewed. We've reduced that to about 4 months now. Part of that is because of the way that Scholastica's system is automated. It sends automatic reviews, reminders to review. We also revised our training of the editors because we don't have a professional staff. That was something we really had to invest in to make an open access journal work for us, is we needed to figure out what kind of feedback is really heard by the authors, how to make that feedback, but also training them on how to use the site, which was pretty user-friendly, and expectations in terms of turnaround time. I already mentioned the system's very user-friendly, which helped reduce timelines. And then we've also, on our About Us page on our journal, we actually have a timeline about how much time things are supposed to take. And so authors have the ability to check that, and if they're not getting the feedback they need in a set amount of time, they're encouraged to reach out to us and hold us accountable. And then the final thing is, and this is partly capitalizing on that web platform, is we've actually moved to a rolling publication. We no longer publish in issues. There was a big debate about that in the industry before we made that change. There were concerns about how things would be cited and what that meant for people that are on tenure track positions and whether or not this would work for them. We've had absolutely no problem with this. We publish 1 issue per year, and then we encourage individuals to check the actual publication date of a given article. And now that DOIs are assigned, it's made citations even easier. We have device optimization. Moving to a website that wasn't 10 years old helped improve that, so you can read these in HTML and in PDF on your PC, mobile device, or tablet. The 2 things we haven't gotten to yet are the archiving, which is definitely part of best practices for any open archive system or open access journal. And we also haven't quite capitalized on the web-only platform. So in 2020, Scholastica is helping to get us up to par with identifying an archives site and how to go about that and making that migration. And then we also are working to really solicit authors and encourage them to submit video or interactive content so that we can capitalize on that web-only platform. We've also talked a lot with Scholastica earlier about adding a comment feature. That's really difficult, as I've learned, with open access journals because it's open access. And that is, anybody can see our materials. And so allowing commenting means that somebody really needs to manage the comments, or we need some kind of login. Otherwise, we're going to have spam, we're going to have bots, etc., and that's not something that we want to encourage. We really want to encourage a conversation and a productive conversation. And then lastly, we are trying to automate more things to, again, capitalize on that web platform and create a faster turnaround. We also are looking to expand our editorial board just to help with turnaround, which is not necessarily about the web-only platform or open access, but definitely helps us meet our goals. So with that, here's my contact information. My term as editor-in-chief is actually up at the end of this calendar year, but you can email this email address and it goes to the current editor of Survey Practice. So feel free to reach out now or in the future.
Thanks so much, Ashley. That was great. So now we'll transition into our Q&A portion. And we do have some questions coming in. And I would say anybody in the audience listening, if you have a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box or the chat panel. And that way we can see those. So our first question from Lindsay McCullum. Where do the funds come from to support the Open Journal of Astrophysics?
Shall I? I'll start.
Do you want to start? And then I can.
So there's basically 2 parts to the answer to this one. One is that the original project, the Open Journal project, got going because we got a modest grant from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, a charitable donation, which allowed us to set up and do our own prototype. We still have some money left in that grant. That allowed us to actually get started in thinking what we wanted to do with the journal, and it gives us some money for promoting the journal, advertising, so sending things out and so on. The ongoing costs coming from running the Scholastica site do not come from that. Fiona will say something about those.
Yeah, in terms of the ongoing cost of subscription to the Scholastica platform, we fund that through the library's budget. As part of our piloting of open publishing initiatives, we got agreement to do that from our own library budget. But bearing in mind that the cost of the subscription to Scholastica is very, very modest in comparison to the rather substantial sum we pay for subscriptions to traditional journals. So from our point of view, it's a very cost-effective way of basically providing access to a journal. Also, the fact that Scholastica is sort of managed and hosted means that there's very little, I suppose, staff input required from our end, which is also a factor, because sometimes people might say, would you not look at more open source products that might be out there? And the thing is around that, that's all well and good, but there needs to be sort of more investment of staff time and a bit more expertise in some cases around those type of products. So for us, the Scholastica platform kind of ticked a lot of boxes in the sense of being comparatively very inexpensive in relation to other journal subscriptions, but also very straightforward to use and requiring very little staff input from our side of the house for something that's professional and manages peer review and has, you know, good look, it looks well and so forth.
Awesome. And our next question is from Olga Pinkerton. There was a mention of authors publishing with open access before or after publishing in a subscription-based journal. Does this cause conflicts with big publishers? She says, would Elsevier or Sage, for instance, allow republication or pre-publication of an OA platform? So I think maybe this is referring to the archive.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. In principle, many journals don't allow publication of or public dissemination, shall we put it that way, of an article before it's published by the journal. But it seems to me that that's very rarely policed, in fact. So there's quite a lot of stuff that you find on the archive which is coming out in Nature or an Elsevier journal or something like that. And officially it's there. It's probably shouldn't be there on the archive, but it is there on the archive. So I have a feeling that probably when the open access movement really sort of kicks off, there might be a bit stricter control by the big publishers about how this happens. Of course, with our journal, the Open Journal, that's the way the thing is published, so there's no conflict at all. Everything that we do is under a CC BY license, and it's just there. And so there's no conflict. There are some journals that I'm aware of that will not allow you to submit to the archive until 6 months or a year have elapsed from the publication of the article. And of course, that makes a bit of a mockery of open access policy. I think the best thing is for it to be available to everyone straight away. So it's an interesting, at the moment in many journals, it's a grey area. Some journals that I know, they say that actually the preprint, the e-print, if you like, is not the published article. It's not in the same format. It's not being typeset by the same software and so on. So it's kind of not really the same thing at all, and therefore it's all right. But there are some journals that are quite keen to stamp out this practice. So it's an interesting question, and I don't think there's a simple answer to it.
Sure, definitely. And another question from Olga for Ashley. Can you please explain more about how you handle rolling publications with one issue per year? Do you combine articles at the end of the year into an issue?
Sure. So at the first article that we publish each year, we create a new issue, a new volume as well. And then from then on, so it's just, I think we're in volume 12 at the moment. So we have volume 12, issue 1. And then every week or however often we publish a new article, we simply assign that to the existing issue 1. So the issue grows over the course of the year. And if you're on a Scholastica website in particular, we can publish an article and then just assign it to the issue. And so it just ends up being in that folder. I think at the top of the screen, whenever you're on the issues, it says for anything published post 2017 that you need to look at the publication date of the article, not the publication date of the issue, and that's how it should be cited.
Awesome, and we have another question from Susanna. This is for Peter. I would like to ask if your Open Journal of Astrophysics is an example of an overlay journal. I heard that term in association with journals dealing with articles deposited on the archive, but I'm not sure about the exact meaning. That's a really good question.
Yeah, so I used that word in my presentation. Yes, it is an overlay journal, and it's basically in the sense that on the Open Journal of Astrophysics website is basically a window through which you reach the archive. The paper is actually sitting on the archive. The refereed published version is actually on the archive. So we just put a sort of an overlay which allows you to access that and which has the relevant metadata on it. If I know a number of people are a little bit worried and say, well, what happens if the archive disappeared overnight? You know, if it had a meltdown or the money ran out or something, wouldn't the paper then be lost? Well, in fact, the Scholastica system does keep a copy of the refereed article inside the peer review system. That's there for us to access. So it's kind of archived separately from the archive, as it were. And that ensures that if the archive is not accessible, we still actually have a legacy copy of the paper. But we want to emphasize that the archive is the place where you find your scientific research. So you just have an overlay, and if you want to read it, you click the button and you go to the archive and get it from there. So it's kind of just like a cover sheet for the archive entry. And I reckon that actually reflects the reality of how people do publishing in my area of research. I mean, as I said in the talk, I don't go to journals anymore. I just go to the archive. Everything that I need can be found on the archive. And I don't see why we should go to some third-party site to find it. So yes, an overlay journal is, and incidentally, another thing I should perhaps add, there's no reason in principle why an overlay journal could not be set up on some other repository other than the archive. So many institutes, including Maynooth, has a repository, and there's no reason why you couldn't have overlay journals sitting on top of those. The Scholastica platform is set up for the archive, but basically the way it works would, in principle, work with many other. So there's now a bio archive type thing, and there are a number of institutional repositories. And I would like to see other publishers thinking about putting overlay journals on other repositories. And I'm sure that will happen pretty soon.
Sure, yeah, there's definitely many more repositories out there now than before. And we are getting close to time here, so I'll take just one more question. We have from Michelle, what is your data governance when working with Scholastica? Oh, in case archive disappears, it looks like you already answered that question. But I suppose, do you have anything else to add in terms of if there was to be a challenge with archive going away, how you would address that as an overlay journal, or I guess any thoughts for overlay journals in general on that concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sincerely hope that doesn't happen, and I think the community would not allow it to happen. But it wouldn't be the end of the world for us. It would cause some problems, but I think we just move it so that we had we put the papers that we've published on another repository, and we would still have the site pretty much the same it was. Instead of read archive, it would be read some other place. So we might put it on the movement repository, for example, put our articles there and allow people to read them. But I actually think for my research field, the archive is the single most important tool for accessing scientific results. And there would be a gross negligence if the scientific community around the world allowed something to happen to it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we are about at time here, so I'm going to just do a quick wrap up for us. And as we did our questions period, so thank you everybody for that. And if you have additional questions for the speakers, everybody will get the recording of this webinar, and I believe everybody provided some contact information, so I'm sure you can send additional questions as well. But I did want to say thank you again to everyone for joining us for today's webinar, and a big thank you to our guest speakers. This has been a great discussion, and we hope you'll take some actionable steps and insights away from this. We do invite you to stay in touch with Scholastica by following us on Twitter. We also have Facebook. And then additionally, I wanted to say, for more information on open access publishing best practices and examples, we do invite you to check out Scholastica's journal resources page and blog. And again, everyone will receive a link to this webinar recording, and we'll also make that available on our website so you can have access to that as well. So thank you so much again to everybody for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks so much.